Now let's go to some other things I wanted to do when the show began. And that's talk about beating the liberal blacklist and being banned in Britain. I am the most trusted source of news and information that the networks and cronies in Washington don't want you to hear. Me. I'm the most trusted source of analysis and information that the networks and cronies in Washington don't want you to hear. And in this book, Banned in Britain, which I wrote years ago, you'll find secret documents and emails which prove that the British government conspired to besmirch me, an innocent man, and my reputation, and it was kept under wraps by both Britain and America's censored Marxist media. And I'm reaching out to you of all faiths, of all political parties and creeds, who value your right to free speech and the sanctity of independent thought. I'm reaching out to you to understand that this is not just about conservatives' freedom of speech. It's for anyone who expects to have a future voice in America. I am the only member of the American media banned in Britain. You would think that at a time like this, Fox News would be reaching out to Savage and saying, hey, you've been tarred and feathered by this. Why don't you tell us what happened? Tell us what the government of England did. Tell us why Cameron will not take you off the list. But no, I am persona non grata. So what? I live with it. But, Mr. President, my fellow debaters, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to play for you now the speech that never was, which is Michael Savage's historic speech to the Cambridge Union that was canceled by a government intimidation that was originally scheduled for October 15, 2009. Let me repeat what I'm going to play for you. The Cambridge Union, known for vigorous debates, invited me to speak in 2009. And I was prepared to speak in 2009. Even though I had been banned, they were going to set up a TV feed for me to debate this issue of freedom of speech in Cambridge, the famous Cambridge Debate Society. But at the last minute, their government intervened and canceled my appearance in Cambridge, England. And so I gave the speech nevertheless, and we're about to play a piece of it for you right now on the Savage Nation. Mr. President, my fellow debaters, ladies and gentlemen, or shall I stop right now? Why don't we begin with an actual opening from Cambridge University, the opening that you should have heard had Cambridge University lived by its traditions. Let's hear it, folks.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Cambridge Union Society this evening for this very special debate. We have a distinguished lineup of guests, many MPs, as well as, of course, our guest of honor,
Michael Savage! Well, my chair will be empty tonight. This group of children who has taken over the Cambridge Debating Society have given the society a black eye that they will never recover from. Now, they will try to hide it from their own archives, but remember, I don't think this has ever occurred before. The government of the Gordon Brown administration no doubt intimidated them, that's my guess, with the threat of cutting off funds. So I will debate as though I am there, even though my chair is empty. Mr. President, my fellow debaters, ladies and gentlemen, I've been invited to debate before you tonight against the insanity of political correctness because a terrible injustice has been done. In May of this year, former Home Secretary Jackie Smith, now fired, released a list of murderers and terrorists banned from entering the United Kingdom. Michael Savage was also included on this list. In doing this to me, she has linked and listed one of America's most beloved radio talk show hosts who has 10 million listeners alongside Russian skinheads who are in prison for having murdered 10 immigrants and videoed the murders, as well as a Hamas murderer who executed 2 Jewish parents, hunted down their 4-year-old daughter who they hid inside a crawl space, and when he found the little child, he crushed in her head with a rifle butt. That's right, my name is on a list with those people. Would not criminals of this caliber be arrested immediately upon entry into the United Kingdom? Or does this imply that all but those on the list are allowed into the United Kingdom? For example, Osama bin Laden was not on this list. Would he be allowed to enter the UK? Why would someone who has never committed a crime, nor appeared as a defendant in a criminal trial, nor been accused of an actual crime, be placed on such a high-profile list by a major nation of the West? I say that it is because of the continuing erosion of freedom of speech in America, in the United Kingdom, and in all nations where such liberties are supposedly granted, and this under the dirty veil of political correctness. My continued dedication to the principles of borders, language, and culture should seem no threat to a nation diligently aware of its own national identity. Admittedly, in my broadcasts, I may not reflect the keen and cool dignity of British gentility, but I have Savile Row in my soul. I must assume, then, that I pose a threat to the government, and one just as frightening as the most dangerous of international terrors, the thought criminal. This is a person whose thoughts and ideas are so powerful that they lead people to disobey the establishment. George Washington knew this. George Washington had become a thought criminal of the United Kingdom. Did you know that? And history has shown us that when an injustice is being done to a people, they rebel. It is those quiet, peaceful decisions made behind closed doors by polite gentlemen and their associates in seedy back rooms, shrouded in smoke, that provoke the people to action. Secret decisions with no oversight or communication of the kind which sidestep laws and civil liberties with total disregard for the voting public. This is what led to the tyrants of Hitler, Stalin, Castro, Hugo Chavez. We can throw a few others in. Rulers who, when given an inch, will run thousands of miles, perhaps right through our own homes. Ladies and gentlemen, people who disagree with the status quo, whether it's called political correctness or anything else, must speak up and be counted for. Speak for themselves and question authority. I, Michael Savage, have done nothing but this. Yet my opinions are casually shrugged off by so-called liberals in the government and in the media as valueless because they are not politically correct, an ideology with strict guidelines for what should be said and what should not be said in the limelight. Let me explain something. My crime is really nothing more than being a nationalist, a man who loves America, a man who has defined America as a nation defined by its borders, language, and culture. That is anathema to the internationalist Gordon Brown, Barack Obama, and the other internationalists who have now seized democracies across the globe. And as political correctness erodes the volume and value of our vocabulary, so too does it erode our freedom of speech and freedom to hold our lawmakers accountable. Accountable! An idea which in a modern sense can be traced at least as far back as the Magna Carta. People and their culture are not to be homogenized until they are compatible with other cultures and people. Compatibility must come from within, from debate and discourse and compromise and even legislation, but not from an arbitrary standard which might work for some people in some nations, but not, as Lincoln said, to apply to all of the people all of the time.
I'll be right back.
I'd like to return now to my Freedom of Speech Award speech, which is a new freedom of speech, which is the ability to speak via talk radio and over the Internet, something not yet banned by Barack Hussein Obama and Gordon Brown. And every word I'm about to say to you comes from my heart. Whether it's the truth or not will be for you to determine. I swear on my Bible that what I'm telling you is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I challenge Gordon Brown to do the same in his bunker in London. Let him get out a Bible. Let him get out the King James Bible and swear to God that he knows that I belong on that list. I doubt very much that he'd be able to do that. Now, what kind of kingdom has Britain become? Isn't freedom of speech a value that Western nations must preserve at all costs? One which sets us apart from dictatorship, anarchy, and fatal corruption? Yet it is precisely because of my freedom of speech that I've been targeted by the socialist government in England. This, combined with the appointment of the American FCC's new diversity czar in the United States, are further steps towards the extinguishing of independent thought on the airwaves and the so-called restructuring of free media based on the FCC's diatribe, according to Mark Lloyd, the diversity czar. Listen to me. In 2007, I was awarded the Freedom of Speech Award by Talkers Magazine. How could the winner of such an award be singled out and banned from traveling to Britain? Well, let's look at it another way. I remember in the 1960s when true liberals used to say, I may disagree with you, but I would fight to the death your right to say it. When have you last heard a liberal say, oh, I may disagree with conservative talk radio, but I would fight to the death their right to say what they believe in? I don't hear that anymore. What instead I hear is, oh, I think it's time to pass a standard to bring accountability to the airwaves. That was stated earlier this year by left-wing Democrats in the House of Representatives. I realize saying left-wing Democrats is an oxymoron. Is that liberalism? Aren't Britain and the U.S. about freedom of speech? That's what this nation has been about from the day it was founded. That's the trail of tears and the trail of blood that led to the freedoms that we enjoy in this nation today. And we cannot permit a few small-minded martinets who don't even know that they're inhabiting the souls of dictators in Congress right now to deny us a freedom of speech. Where are the true good liberals? Where are they? Let's take radio, for example. It's about political correctness. Today, radio is in a more perilous state than it's been in its entire history. As I speak with you, Senator Richard Durbin of Illinois and even Nancy Pelosi were recently circulating a bill in Congress for the so-called fairness doctrine. What is that? Fairness? It's not fairness. It would require the holders of broadcast licenses to present controversial issues of public importance in a manner that was, in the view of the FCC, honest, equitable, and balanced. What does that actually mean? What is honest? What is equitable? And what is balanced? Well, it's a form of political correctness. What this would mean is that people such as myself would no longer be able to speak freely. Is that not dictatorship, the fairness doctrine? Of course it is. It's just that we use fancy rhetoric in this country as opposed to police powers. But make no mistake about it. The fairness doctrine is political correctness. It is censorship, and it has no place in the United States of America. Let me go to another point. Here in America, we enjoy the freedoms afforded us in the First Amendment. The First Amendment is very clear. In Britain, there is no First Amendment. And yet, we see in Britain, speech is already being amended and controlled by liberals who may not like what you're saying. Let's make sure that never happens here in America. Now, let me give you some other examples of the power of freedom of speech. For example, I have said many times that Al Gore is a liar when he preaches that all scientists now agree that global warming is caused by human activity. If I can refute Gore's lies on the airwaves by citing numerous prominent scientific studies which refute Gore's hysterical con, I am using freedom of speech granted to me by the United States Constitution to do so. If radical environmental freaks were to make it a crime to deny global warming, did you hear what I just said to you? There are radical environmental freaks in the Obama administration, in the United Nations and elsewhere, who want to make it a crime to deny global warming. You've heard that, didn't you? They say they want to criminalize anyone who denies global warming. Well, such refutations as mine and those of prominent scientists would be banished from the discussion. Let's look at Iran. Ahmadinejad, the new Hitler of our time, the so-called president of Iran, has said that the Holocaust never occurred. The Holocaust never occurred, he says. Yet there's ample evidence in film, in video, and other places that could be shown at the United Nations. And he's also declared his desire to create a new Holocaust against the Jews in Israel. And yet we see prominent lawyers and journalists, some of Jewish descent even, in our own nation denying the Islamo-fascist connection. Worst, even defending Islamic murderers, for example, in Guantanamo, who would gladly cut their throats and decapitate them while chanting to Allah. Why do they do this? They do it out of fear of offending the SS of today, the Islamo-fascists. They refuse to talk about the codification of hatred for the West, for freedom, for Jews, for Israel, for the United States and our way of life. That is freedom of speech, is it not? Well, what is freedom of speech? Why do these intellectuals who defend Ahmadinejad deny their own freedom of speech to defend the freedom to preach hatred by their enemies? Why? I'll let you decide why. It's all about fear. Something else about freedom of speech you should know about, and that would be sarcasm, ridicule, and satire. These are elements of freedom.
Savage.
I continue now, and I will conclude shortly with my speech that I would have given today via video link to the Cambridge Debating Society that was abruptly canceled without warning, just as my name was put on a list without warning. This is a giant conspiracy, but I want to repeat again. What I'm about to say to you is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and I challenge Gordon Brown to put his hand on a King James Bible and say that everything he's about to say is the truth and nothing but the truth. All right. And I want to repeat again that I don't just go after liberals or Democrats. For years I criticized the contractor abuses in Iraq under George Bush. Whose freedoms was I denying then? You have to understand that I am an independent. I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican. I am not a liberal. I'm not really a conservative. By definition, I'm probably a nationalist. But that's a discussion for another time. But whose freedoms was I denying when I pointed out the contractor abuses for years on my radio program? Was it the freedoms of the military-industrial complex to rob the public? President Eisenhower once warned us to beware the military-industrial complex. I played his speech on my show over and over again. Now, who was I criticizing by playing that speech, Democrats or Republicans? I'll let you decide. When I state that our Army and Marine heroes are being sent in to fight door to door and suffer and die, and then they are given court-martials if they do their job a little too well, because Obama is either the most hesitant or incompetent commander-in-chief in the history of this nation, whose freedoms am I denying? President Bush said he would not have politicians telling our generals how to conduct the war. Well, I wonder, was he not a politician telling generals how to conduct the war? No war, whether it was in Iraq under Bush or Afghanistan and Iraq under Obama, no war has ever been conducted like this. The same mistakes are being repeated by Obama in Afghanistan. Again, how about another issue? The monster issue, the one that they all want to hide, the issue of 30 million illegal aliens swarming across the United States of America. When I call illegal aliens invaders, and I present the social and fiscal drain that this invading army of illegal aliens is causing on our society, whose freedoms am I denying? Who am I offending? Is it the doctrinaire, knee-jerk Republicans or the Democrats? Probably both. When I, Michael Savage, support my position for borders, language, and culture, do I deny my fellow citizens their rights to redress their grievances to a government all too eager to continue flooding our nation with cheap laborers? When I present the fact that 30% or 1 out of 3 prisoners in federal prison is an illegal alien who came to this nation, 1 out of 3 prisoners in federal prison is an illegal alien who committed a felony, somebody who didn't belong here to begin with. Do I deny or do I grant my fellow U.S. citizens their right to speak freely through me, a talk show host? Whose rights was I offending? Whose rights was I denying? Certain special interests, I would assume. If these and other like opinions of mine were mine alone, I would not have risen to this position I now enjoy in the world of the spoken and written word. In fact, I am the voice of the voiceless, who have been marginalized and silenced by the illiberal liberals who control virtually all avenues of images and ideas that the world now sees. All images and ideas controlled by the radical left, with the limited exception of conservative talk radio, the most vulnerable medium, now under attack by the new National Socialists who would, well, I really should say the new National International Socialists, who would ban free speech that they disagree with by threatening sponsors through extortionist means of false boycotts or by using other techniques, but wanting to achieve the same ends of any dictatorship. And what is that end? The total control of speech, which is the opposite of freedom of speech. Not only is this politically incorrect, it is categorically incorrect. So-called political correctness has no place in a free society. In conclusion, I want you to remember this. The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was written not to protect polite speech. It was written to protect offensive speech. Vigorous, loud debate is the hallmark of a free society, not the pitiful morgue of politeness. I'm Michael Savage, and I've just presented my arguments against political correctness in a speech that was supposed to have been broadcast to England, to the Cambridge Debating Society, but was arbitrarily cut off just before broadcast by a group of children who have inherited a great university's debating society and have trashed it owing to pressures by the Gordon Brown administration, in my opinion.
Well, I think you just heard a historic speech that you probably never heard before. It's the speech that never was. It was canceled by government intimidation. It was scheduled for October 15, 2009, and oh, how relevant it still is today. Isn't it interesting that it could have been stated today? With the exception of Gordon Brown's name, substitute Cameron. With the exception of Ahmadinejad, substitute one of the mullahs who runs Iran. And that speech is just as fresh then as it is today. That makes it a speech that will live through time. The last line of that speech is one I want to pick up from. Vigorous, loud debate is the hallmark of a free society, not the pitiful morgue of politeness. And I said that the First Amendment was written not to protect polite speech, but to protect offensive speech.